How cool it is today that our story begins with some kind of party where cool music is playing. And apparently at this party, the guy decided to dance with a beautiful lady. But he was clearly less fortunate because he was just sitting at the table and drinking drinks. Although he still looks like a very cool guy who just watches other people have fun. Suddenly, someone decides to come up to him, put a hand on his shoulder and ask what is happening here. It turns out that it's his friend who just can't help but make fun of him. Why the hell is he sitting here like a pillar and doesn't go to the dance floor? The main character just laughed it off, saying that he's not in the mood. But still, his friend decides to remind him that they came here precisely because of him, so let him remember what their main mission is in this club. Their conversation is interrupted by some lady who immediately runs up to the guy and calls him Appa. She just didn't understand why he was still here, because such a long break was quite enough, so it was time for them to return. Without even allowing him to say a word in response, the girl took his best friend away from the main character, and then he is once again left alone with his thoughts. In parting, the friend simply says that he will leave here first specifically to play American football with this lady. All the boy can do is just look after his best friend and try to understand what kind of guy he is. When suddenly next to our boy, a mysterious girl in a red dress appears and says that this situation looks pretty pathetic. I wonder what's so interesting about the fact that people just came here to dance. She constantly smiled at him and asked if his friend had brought him here too. And she seemed to be able to interest the boy. The lady was beautiful and she was the first to talk to him. In general, yes, a friend brought him here. There was incredibly loud music playing in the club, so they couldn't have a normal conversation. And the lady comes up with the only solution to this situation. They will have to be closer to each other in order to hear normally what the interlocutor is saying, and the boy himself does not mind the fact that such a beauty is nearby. Although all this was still too boring, the girl suggested leaving here and talking in a quieter place. Damn it, she's a real beauty. She suggested we go and take a walk, just the two of us. The main character was definitely lucky today. But we all understand perfectly well how it will end. Another game of football. The girl is still a master of sports. Still, everything went exactly as she thought, because she immediately saw that the main character had real talent for this game. He continued to throw the ball over and over again, and did not even give the girl a chance to win. The main character was simply incredibly good at this game. It was not for nothing that she then approached him in that club. Everything about playing football was important to her, and the lady asked if he even liked the game. And this idiot just starts smiling, saying that he is still not completely sure of his answer. In order to give an accurate answer, he will simply have to defeat her. So he decides to do so. The boy begins to play much more seriously than before, and now she will definitely lose to him. The lady simply asked him to stop because it was incredibly difficult to play against such a tough opponent, but he was not going to listen to her. A couple more goals scored, Madam simply doesn't know what to do against such a cool football player. When the main character began to play more seriously, it became much more interesting to play. Now she is also going to give her all so as not to yield to him. What beautiful eyes, she tried. But all her strength was clearly not enough to defeat such a monster. He simply constantly took the ball away from her. She again thought that it would be right to ask him to play not so seriously because it was very difficult for her. But Sigma would not listen to some woman. All that was left was to score the last goal, so the main character decides to put all his strength into the last shot. This makes it even more scary for her to play against such an opponent, because she definitely won't be able to parry the blow. Well, that's all. The decisive goal of this match was scored, so now the main character can be declared the winner. She herself admits that she hasn't met such tough opponents for a long time, and asked what kind of guy it was to play against her. And he himself doesn't know what to answer, because he didn't play football that often, maybe even never. The guy just said that it was normal. In response, the lady simply begins to joke that the main character will never admit that he liked playing football against her. Was it really so difficult to say about it? Still, football is a very difficult game after which you definitely need to go to the bathroom. Of course, this is not the end yet. Let the boy rest for now before the second round of football begins. That's exactly what he did. He just lay down to rest and look at the ceiling, but it seemed like he didn't like something. The main character simply exhaled and decided to admit the fact that the girl most likely had no idea that he was not playing at full strength. And what was much more important was that playing football did not bring him any joy because he did not even play at half strength. Next, the actions are transferred to the hospital where the boy nevertheless told his doctor about this problem. The doctor himself strangely noticed that he could not give his fullest in the football match. But this is exactly what the main character has been trying to tell him for an hour. No matter how strange it was, judging by his analyses, everything was completely normal with the boy. Maybe he's just too good at football to play with such weak opponents. Another joke in the direction of the guy, because it's hard to imagine what kind of monster he can become if he plays at full strength. but he's clearly not in the mood for jokes now, and he doesn't understand why the doctor can't take his treatment seriously. Be that as it may, all this is completely unimportant now, and the main character sat down to unravel the real cause of his problem. The actions are transferred to memories in which he was just playing football with a girl, and she was sure that she would soon lose to him again. It was so strange because only recently, she had already lost in the last round, and it seemed that another loss was not long in coming. And the boy himself at that moment looked as sad as possible because he understood perfectly well that the girl was simply not his rival. All this time she thought that the main character liked him, which is why he played with her as an equal opponent, but we all know that he did not give it his all. But it was at that moment that our boy decided to say that this game was simply incredible, and he had simply never had such a tough opponent. But at the same time, in his thoughts, the guy himself tried to understand whether this game was as good as he said, or whether he just said all this so as not to offend the girl. The whole problem was precisely that when the boy played football with her, he felt absolutely nothing. And yet she could clearly see from his face that he was sad, and she couldn't even think how many times he needed to defeat her to become happy. He's just a real beast in football. And then the incredible idea came to her mind to continue playing football until it became joyful. Of course, the main character definitely didn't like this idea, but he still agreed to continue playing football so as not to offend her. As a result, this couple simply played football all day. But the main character was never able to become joyful from this game. At this point, the doctor began to worry because these symptoms were very serious, and he decided to ask how long ago he had had this. About 2 or maybe 3 months ago. At first, he just thought that he was just tired, but over time, everything only got worse. Then let the boy better tell you about the last time when he was completely glad that he was playing football, and then he already has to start thinking. And although he definitely has such a memory, and now it will take us to that moment when the main character was still happy about playing football like a little boy. An image of some girl begins to appear in his head who asked him if she was really such a bad opponent in football for him. The image of that lady was firmly stuck in his head, and she constantly asked if he really thought that someone like her simply couldn't please him. After unlocking such a memory, the guy simply begins to panic and he yells at the entire doctor's office. Damn it, but the doctor was so scared. Why the hell did he even start yelling so loudly? He was the main character, and just said that he couldn't remember the moment when he was really happy about the game. So it's better not to ask him such questions. Hell, the guy is desperate and wants to ask if this can be cured at all, because he also wants to be happy that he plays football. Looking at the boy, he begins to understand that he has no physical injury, and most likely this is something at the psychological level. Unfortunately, he is not very well versed in this area, so he cannot help him. And then the guy just starts to get angry because he trusted this doctor, and he said that he could cure him. It turns out that this doctor is the cousin of the main character, and he had to tell him about his problems, and it was so offensive to hear now that he simply could not help him. But it goes without saying that the cousin is not going to just abandon his brother like that, and he takes out some kind of card from his wallet. If he cannot help him, then there are other specialists who understand all this better. But the main character had already lost all hope of a happy game of football, and did not understand what specialist he was talking about. A consultant for football players, she was a cousin's assistant, and would definitely be able to help him. She had special methods to treat her patients, so let her help definitely be useful. But despair still did not leave him. Despite all this, the main character still agrees to call her as soon as he has free time. Since they have already finished, the main character is going to leave, and so is the doctor. Standing in front of the elevator, he simply begins to ask himself when he should have lived his best years of life, if he is now just over 20 years old. The main character is simply trying to convince himself that he can still be helped, but there is uncertainty that he will remain like this until the end of his days, and he is also haunted by the thought that he won't be able to just calmly play football with the person he really loves. Just as he was about to call the elevator to leave here, suddenly someone appeared behind him. Finally, they told us the guy's name. His name is Yoon Sung, and the lady was really so happy to see him. But unlike her, he certainly didn't expect to meet Ajuma here. It was somehow strange for her that the main character came here and decided to ask him. Maybe something was bothering the guy. He tried to laugh it off, but it was clear from his face that something had definitely happened. Just let the boy tell him everything, and in such cases she is like a person who has definitely lived longer than he will help him with some advice. For some time there was a long and awkward silence, when suddenly he simply turns away and says that he has already said that nothing terrible happened to him. And even she decides that she must make a joke on the guy in this situation, and says that most likely this is some kind of strange situation that the main character does not want to share with her. And they decide to tell us that her name is Cho Ha-yeon. She is 12 years older than the main character, and also lives next door to him. And then the boy decides to tell us something in secret, because Yoon Sung had previously lied to his cousin when they were in the hospital. because a couple of months ago, a situation occurred that he will now tell us about. There was a lady who asked the main character if she was really such a bad opponent. Woon-sung himself did not understand what she meant, after which, apparently, she decides that it's time to prove to him that she too can play football well. At this point, Shiojuma just starts crying and asks if she really played football that bad. And then the guy was simply shocked because it was important to her, not only that she played bad football, but also that she wanted the guy to like him. After which the actions returned back when Ajuma tried to return the main character back to the real world. In her opinion, he looked terribly sick, but he decided to make an excuse by saying that he simply had not slept all night and now felt weak. But with all this, he constantly thought in his head only about that very only girl who managed to become a worthy opponent for him. Ajuma simply warned him that no matter how young he now considered himself, he simply could not take on so many things at the same time. He also needed to rest. So stand by. Why the hell did this girl have rings on her finger right now? Is she married or something? The main character, of course, was simply terrible to admit this, but still he played football with a girl who already had a husband. She still smiled at him and asked him to sleep well today, but he was still ashamed of playing football with a married girl. Our next chapter begins with a flashback that happened about 6 months ago. Walking along the corridor, the main character noticed something strange and drew attention to it. Namely, the fact that a large number of people were walking along the corridor carrying boxes to the new house. Had someone really moved into the apartment next door? And then they showed us a girl who apparently decided to help the workers a little and carry a couple of boxes. Of course, it's incredibly difficult for such a fragile lady like her to do this, so she dropped all the boxes right at the main character. As a result, another situation the boy finds himself in, but he immediately met a new neighbor. Of course, she immediately began to worry about the guy. Maybe he hit something during the fall. But it seems that she managed to recognize Yoon Sona, even called him by name. But where did they already know each other? Damn, it turns out that she was a professor in the place where the main character studied. This made the situation even worse than before. Then the actions moved to the moment when the boy was sitting with her in a cafe, and she was clearly glad to meet him after so long. He was also glad because 2 whole years had already passed since she ceased to be the professor's assistant, and she was only surprised that time had flown by so quickly. And then the main character decides to introduce us to the girl again. Her name was Cho Ha-yeon, and she is a famous screenwriter in the field of cinema. When there was a moment when this lady spoke from the podium of the university where he studied, and among all the students, he was the only one who listened to all her lectures with interest. Then she began to talk about how she felt extremely lonely because she had moved to a completely unfamiliar area, and it was a real relief to find out that the main character had now become her new neighbor. Now she will have a person with whom she can play when she gets bored, but the problem was that the guy had too many worries and not enough free time. She didn't understand at all what this idiot was talking about, because now he was on vacation. What other worries could he have? But now he had to prepare to return to the university. While the boy was talking about all this, the lady had a great proposal. Every time the boy plays games with her, she will look at his sketches because the main character himself must understand perfectly well that the chance to learn from a brilliant screenwriter only comes once in a lifetime. The boy thought that it was incredibly arrogant of her to bargain with him like that, but still he respected this quality. Now she is just waiting for his answer. Of course, he agrees. As an aspiring writer, he would be a real idiot if he refused the help of a professional. She thought that the boy made the right choice. After that, the couple just sat in a cafe and talked, and the main character told us that this is how his deal with the devil, that is, with that girl, began. Sometimes a guy would just come to visit her and they would cook and eat together. Sometimes she asked him to help with household chores and tidy up the apartment. These two even started going to training together, and the boy had to run a lot. Well, when she got too lonely, they bought drinks and went to drink them together. Shock occurred because the main character found out that she was now living separately from her husband. Yes, everything was exactly like that. 2 whole years had passed since they began to live separately. The girl even moved to this area specifically because she wanted to be as far away from her husband as possible. But the more the girl tried to stay away from him, the stronger the feeling became, as if she was completely alone and would never have a family. At that moment, the main character looked at her with such a pitiful face, it was immediately clear that he was very sorry for the professor. She begins to laugh and cry at the same time, and also asks for forgiveness because she told him all sorts of nonsense because she drank too much beer. The lady still could not understand why he still continued to call her that, because too much time had passed since she was a professor. And then the boy has a question. How can he then address her? Maybe it's Nuna. From Korean, this is an address to an older sister or a girl who is older in age. Say something without thinking at all. After all, they had a big age difference. It's better to call her Ajuma. It was just a respectful address from Korean to girls as a rule who were already married. And the main character likes it even more now and will definitely constantly call her Ajuma. After which the party at which they drank drinks continued, and it became known as the story about a student and a teacher. After some time, they finally came to the realization that they communicated much closer than just ordinary neighbors. After which the very moment came, Ajuma decided to kiss the main character while she was all in tears. But at that moment, he was as if in some kind of nightmare or even shock. In reality, the girl tried to call him for a long time, but he did not answer her at all. As soon as he answered, the only thing she asked was if he was free tonight. Quite a lot of time has passed since that moment, but she still decides to invite the main character to have drinks with her. Of course, the boy is not at all against such a proposal. Yoon-sung will only happily drink with her. And there was something else. The girl had long wanted to talk and tell him one thing, but the boy didn't like this turn of events and asked what she meant. But in response, Ajuma simply said that it was something incredibly important and they should talk. In any case, have the main character come to her house immediately after she contacts him. After Ajuma left, the boy again plunged into thoughts about what the girl was going to tell him. There was still too much time, so he still decided to call the number that his cousin gave him at the hospital, after which the actions are transferred to some place where the football game was taking place. Someone decided to conduct a real training session for people who wanted to learn how to play football and gave all sorts of advice on how to behave correctly in a team. They were warned that the girl standing in front of you is not your ex-girlfriend, and the main goal now was to overcome all their fears just to play on the same team. All this was said by that girl with green hair. The training went just fine, and for now the guys could rest before the start of the next game. Suddenly a call came to her phone from an unknown number, which surprised her greatly. Of course, this turns out to be the main character who finally decided to contact her to ask for advice. Yes, everything was right. She is the person who helps people get back into sports again, but she was wondering who was asking her. He simply explains to her the situation that he received a recommendation at the hospital from his cousin and now wants to make an appointment with her. It was only after the girl heard his name that for some reason she was simply in shock. Without thinking for too long, she repeated his name with a questioning intonation because she couldn't believe that it was really him. In response, he simply confirmed his name, but the girl said that she was looking forward to his appointment. He, of course, did not understand such a strange reaction, but she explained that she had been waiting for a man named Yoon-sung for a long time. After this, the girl even invited him to meet and discuss everything that was bothering him. And of course, they were supposed to meet right now, so let him get ready as soon as possible. The next chapter begins with the main character simply sitting in a cafe with a sad face. And sitting opposite him was a doctor with green hair, and for some reason she looked at him strangely. Of course, he is not going to wait forever and asks when they will start talking, and the lady asked for forgiveness. The girl just had a terrible habit. After she sees some handsome person, she just looks at him and doesn't say anything. She is going to introduce herself more formally. Her name is Cherry Yoon, and she helps people like our main character who has problems when playing football. She was lucky enough to meet a huge number of patients, but she believed that the protagonist's case was truly unique. It was precisely because the main character turned out to be so special that she decided to drop everything she was doing to see him as soon as possible. This was all very cool, of course, but it didn't make him have any less questions about what her consultation was all about, and she decides that it would be better to explain in simple language. The method was certainly strange, but the girl simply talks about the fact that the essence of her work is to return to a person the desire to play football, kindle a fire in his heart, and make a real champion. It was all, of course, just incredibly cool, but the main character didn't understand anything at all. Then Cherry decides that it will be better if she starts giving him examples. When suddenly she remembers his cousin who works at the hospital, he will become just a great example. And the girl decided to reveal the doctor's secret, that until recently even his cousin had a problem playing football normally. Of course, he was simply shocked by this news and simply shouted about it to the entire cafe, but she couldn't reveal the secret, so he'd better be quieter. However, his cousin managed to become an excellent football player again, and it was all thanks to her instructions. After which the action shifted to some hospital worker who asked the director not to play football against her like a real pro. But he had no other choice, because every time he looked at her, he saw just an excellent football opponent. And the way she could handle the ball was simply incredible. He simply cannot concentrate on work properly until he plays football with her. After all, the girl herself wanted them to play football together before starting work. But the girl was completely sure that they couldn't play football right in the clinic. But for the guy, it was all nonsense. He simply continued to play a football match as if the hospital for him really was a football field. He knew very well that the girl was constantly thinking only about how to play football with him, and even specially trained with herself. Did she really think that they would never guess about it? But the lady still said that this had never happened. But this guy definitely can't be fooled because he already knows everything perfectly well, because after she played, she started to smell like a team player. Did the girl really want to play football with him all this time in this damned clinic? If so, then he will gladly do exactly what she wants. He just starts smiling like a real demon and says that he will simply destroy the girl in this game so that she understands who she is messed with. But this doesn't make her any more fun. She just starts screaming in fear, realizing that now a real football master was playing against her. Of course, she couldn't play against him. He constantly took the ball away from her and scored goals. But he didn't care at all about what was happening. While the girl was simply talking about the fact that soon she would simply not be able to play, he only thought about the fact that he liked playing football with him so much. Although she didn't care anymore, she could play football with this guy, which means everything was just fine. Damn, it turns out it was a story about how his cousin started playing football again, and the main character just couldn't believe that he was forced to put on a doctor's uniform. It was just much easier for the guy to play football when he was in a completely different image, so she didn't force anyone, but simply showed what he really wanted. But after all, the girl was simply a master of her craft because recently their marriage had really improved. Even this couple went to the club together. It's just that the girl is trying to explain to the main character what the game of football is. You can simply play at full strength only when your thoughts are completely cleared, as well as your consciousness. It is not those people who are looking for her who are experiencing some kind of illness, but those who cannot adjust their thoughts in their head. And then the truth finally comes to the main character, and he begins to think that he also didn't have any problems. There was just something wrong in his head, which is why he couldn't play football. What a great guy he is. He still managed to admit that there was a problem, which means that he is already halfway to correcting himself, which is exactly why they gathered here. In such cases, she saw that the main character now wants to change, and decided that it would be just a great idea to discuss everything in a calmer place. After which the action is transferred to the hotel, and not just to the hotel, but to a real luxury room. It turns out that the office where her classes were held is currently being renovated, which is why she brought the main character here. To begin with, the guy will have to sign a couple of papers. There's nothing like that, just an ordinary client agreement, but the guy didn't understand why he had to sign something. But she tells him that he gives her permission to simply conduct a constant examination in order to identify the cause of his illnesses and problems. These words, of course, calmed him down a little, but like a real lawyer, the guy decides that it would be better to read the contract before signing it. He even decides to tell her that over the past few months he has tried various methods and even folk remedies, but in fact they were completely ineffective. And after such strong despair, the main character simply could not believe that a simple consultation could cure him, and so that he could play football as before. Interesting client. Of course, he will be able to play football again as before. Just let him trust her. All he had to do was just believe in his own strength, and before that, they would look for the reason that led to this. This was just the beginning of their treatment, so they will soon be able to achieve results. Of course, he still refused to believe, but he agreed anyway. Anyway, he was in no position to simply refuse the help of a professional. In such cases, he really doesn't care anymore, and the main character signs a contract with the words, "Let's do this." Just great. The girl immediately suggested starting a consultation as soon as possible, since he had already agreed to treatment. Madame just sat down next to the main character, but he just didn't understand at all what the hell she was doing. Is this how a real doctor should act? But all this was a well-made plan that she conceived from the very beginning. Now let the main character speak less because she has another mission, so that he starts playing football again like before. Damn it. The guy clearly didn't expect that he would now need to play football and definitely wasn't preparing, but she asked him not to worry because this was the most ordinary training to get him back to wanting to play football. After all, she had already warned him several times that before helping him heal his mind, she needed to examine the situation, so that he should not interfere with the actions of the professional. And while this lady was conducting her medical examination, this is where our video ends. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel and like so that the new part comes out soon.